Normal couples counseling is a long slog. It's no fun for anybody. It can take a year or two to make a lot of progress. And I find I can make more progress in a day with MDMA than 2 years of normal couples counseling.
Hi, I'm Steve Sapourn, and this is The Narrows Journey. I created this show for the man who's ready to see his actions align with who he really is. Join me each week for conversations, practical tools, and real stories to help you take ownership of your mind, your habits, and your life. Here with me is Jonathan Robinson, and he's written a book called Ecstasy for Couples that I'm really interested in. This is one of over a dozen books that he's written, 2 New York Times bestsellers, including one called Communication Miracles for Couples. He's been on Oprah multiple times, and he spent 40 years doing this kind of work with MDMA, with couples and individuals as a therapist. I wanted you on the show for a few reasons. One, I've had personal experience with therapeutic healing, one with sexual abuse, and actually, just as I proposed to my partner, we went into the tent and did an MDMA couples session to start off our relationship together. So it's been an important part of my life. And another thing that drew me to your work is you do a lot of it on Zoom. And to me, depending on which side of the spectrum of psychedelics you're on, it seems like there's either zealots or naysayers, right? And I think the naysayers don't really acknowledge what powerful medicines these are. And the zealots don't want to talk about some of the things, and some of the things that are really difficult is the compromised position that you can be in if you have an unscrupulous guide or therapist. And you do your work on Zoom, so that pretty much eliminates that issue, which I thought was really, really interesting. And you've been doing this for 4 decades, so thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate you, and thanks for being on the show, Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Steve. It should be a good discussion.
Yeah. So, this podcast is called The Narrows Journey. So why don't we talk a little bit about just how your life's arc, your purpose in life landed you doing this work and on the show today.
Well, I was blessed to have a extremely difficult childhood, so that got me looking for other ways to be okay. So at age 12, I got into hypnosis and meditation and yoga. So by 17, I was looking for gurus back east and really anything that might help me overcome my own trauma from childhood and find inner peace. So I eventually, came into psychedelics. And when I first took MDMA, it was so magical because it really opened me up to love and intimacy and healing trauma. So I did my master's thesis on the therapeutic effects of MDMA on overcoming trauma. Have led 700 journeys over 40 years. But when COVID hit, I wanted to see if this could work over Zoom. And to my great surprise, it worked even better over Zoom. Probably because people feel safe and secure in their own house and comfortable. So I wouldn't do any other lead any other psychedelic over Zoom, but MDMA, of 700 sessions, not a single person has had a bad or challenging trip.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely wouldn't want to give somebody a big dose of psilocybin or something on Zoom. That would not be good. But this feels safe, and it's an interesting thing. I've never actually done anything like that, but I think it makes a lot of sense. It allows you to work with people all over the world. It really makes the boundaries clear of who's who. And then, in thinking about this, as somebody who also had a lot of childhood trauma and looks at it as a blessing as well, when I was doing traditional couples therapy, before I'd really done a bunch of this work, what would happen is I would get the request, very reasonable requests from the therapist, like when the things come up, just sit down, listen to what she says, fully hear it out, kind of repeat it back so she understands that she's been hurt. All things I was saying, yeah, of course, I'll do that. And then when the heat of the battle would happen, right? And especially when the content of the narrative wasn't, was related to my behavior, I,
Yeah.
I think it was biologically impossible for me to make that commitment. I mean, to meet that commitment because I had a lot of things going on. I'm going to lose my love. I'm going to lose this. My nervous system is activated. And it created this whole spiral that I really think can take you down, right? Because one,
Mhm.
I went more into shame. Why can't I even, honor a basic commitment that I've made to my wife here? She's looking at me like this cat will never be able to pull it off, right? And nobody mentioned, like nobody talked about the trauma that we were clearly, exhibiting. And so I think one, if in the traditional therapy, if they'd have said that, maybe then I could have said, "Oh, my nervous system was dysregulated," and we could have been in it
Mhm.
together. But I think the magic of the MDMA, whether it cures the trauma over time or not, certainly in that moment, it allows your nervous system not to get overactivated and you can actually listen. So that's me soliloquying a lot about it. But why do you think it's so powerful for couples counseling? And when we were talking, you sort of said, "Man, the long slog of couples counseling, I'm just not into that anymore." And so tell me why you're doing it and why you think it's so effective.
Well, as you mentioned, normal couples counseling is a long slog. It's no fun for anybody. It can take a year or two to make a lot of progress. And I find I can make more progress in a day with MDMA than 2 years of normal couples counseling. And part of the reason is because MDMA reduces blood flow to the trauma part of the brain, the fear part called the amygdala. And so you can connect and all the communication methods that normally would be very hard or topics that would be very hard like sex and money and parenting, they become incredibly easy while on MDMA. Then I also have some methods that really reduce people's triggering, not just during the session, but after the session. So they find it much easier to talk about difficult things because their trauma triggers have been so reduced through both the MDMA and some methods that I give them.
And so are you saying that those methods work in the ceremony, or are you reducing their trauma outside of the ceremony with these methods?
Both,
Both.
both. And, being that I was somebody that came from a lot of trauma, I saw that a lot of therapist methods were just too complex to use in the heat of the moment.
Hmm.
So every method I use, I have some really unique methods. Oprah said my methods were the best she'd ever come across, um, and they're effective because they can all be done in 5 seconds or less.
Oh, well, can you give us a couple methods here?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Give me some examples. That sounds incredible.
So, a lot of couples they argue, and they do a lot of arguments, and you don't normally go from 0 to 100 in an argument. You're a little bit tense, and then your partner triggers you, and then you're more tense, and then you're getting angry and like that. So, a good way to interrupt that cycle is partners make an agreement that either partner at any time can say the words yellow light.
Hmm.
And they agree that if either partner says the words yellow light, which takes about 1.5 seconds to do, that both partners have to be quiet for 2 minutes.
Mm.
And what that does is it interrupts the momentum of upset. So you don't go down the hurt spiral and you can kind of reset your own brain in those 2 minutes of quiet. And then I often have people take some deep breaths or whatever helps them. So couples that can say the words yellow light when they start to get upset
Hmm.
can avoid those nasty triggering arguments.
That's really interesting. So you do that maybe within the ceremony, but then they take that away. And, I would say for men, especially, we've been programmed a lot not to have interoception, not to know our feelings, not to know what's going on. So to be able to just realize maybe a physical trigger and have a timeout for a second without having to explain everything, because oftentimes we might even not have facility with what we're feeling, right?
Right.
And give us enough time. Yeah, so that sounds like a really interesting one. And after they've done a ceremony, you found over 4 decades of doing with, they can then use this strategy in real life.
Yeah, I give other strategies as well. Of course, the easier the strategy, just saying the words yellow light's pretty easy,
Hmm.
but I do have ways to remind people and to motivate people to use these very simple strategies.
Okay, like what?
Well, one that's kind of funny
Hmm.
uh, is I might say, a person might say, I will use the yellow light technique twice this week.
Mm.
And if I don't, I will throw $1 into the garbage.
Okay.
And I mean, it's kind of funny, but I've had people who were literally snorting $20,000 of cocaine a month stop so that they didn't have to throw away $1.
Wow, I wish I would have known you 20 years ago. Wow, amazing. And then, obviously, is it the kind of thing? I mean, it might sound miracle-ish, right, for people because they come to couples therapy, right? It's not like they're heading things off before they're terrible. They're coming to you when things are really bad, I would assume, right?
Usually.
Things are really difficult. Is it the kind of program where you work with that and and they do a session and then maybe they do it again with you in 6 months, or even just sitting with that medicine in a non-therapeutic container after they've had one? Just say, we're going to take some time alone, we're going to be quiet, take this medicine, just listen to some music and talk. Like, is it a benefit over time, or are you saying one session is going to be really beneficial and solve people's 10-year problems?
Well, I've had really good luck. I mean, everybody's unique, but
Hmm.
after the session, I do at least one or two integration meaning they're not on the drug, but I
Hmm.
want to cement the changes that they made and make sure that the techniques that worked for them really well, they continue to work. So it's the 5 hour MDMA session, but then usually it's one, two, or three 1 hour sessions afterwards just to make sure that they have all the support that they need to really make the changes that make a difference.
Mm. And so when we were on our call together, you said before MDMA, you didn't really know or couldn't feel what empathy or love or heart opening really were. And were you taking it in a therapeutic session when when you got it, or how did you use it as a tool in your own life?
Well, I took it with my girlfriend, and I have a unfortunate disadvantage in that I happen to be a guy in this culture or this cult that sure that is not, most guys aren't very attuned to their feelings or empathy. So when I took it with my girlfriend at that time, it just kind of opened me up to a whole new world and helped me to really understand her. I never have couples come into my office and say, we really understand each other really well. That's why we want a divorce, but I have the opposite happen. He just doesn't understand me. That's why I want a divorce. So I started to really understand that my partner was like a different animal, a different species.
Mm.
And I kind of got into her world. And once you see something, you can't unsee it. So I saw that, oh, this is what feelings are like. This is what empathy is like. This is what vulnerability is like. And I just became a much better partner. So now I've been married 24 years and we have a great relationship. Uh, but the bar is low for a lot of men because they don't have those skills unless they've gotten therapeutic help or psychedelic help in some way, or they came from a good family. But for me, I really needed to uh, have the support of some good MDMA to help me to see that there was a world of love and intimacy that I wanted to really take part of.
Interesting. Yeah, and I would say there's so many approaches to this. I certainly have had those benefits. I've also just had a men's group where we got
Hmm.
vulnerable with each other, and I had a very skilled leader who would ask certain questions, like something like try on for size. I undermine all of my relationships because I don't feel worthy of love or whatever. And when it hits
Yeah.
that person, the person would typically get emotional or cry. And for me, when I did that for the first time in front of a group of men, especially men, what was just enlightening about it was the reflections I got back from them. I didn't get shunned, which is what I think I'd thought my whole life. I actually got, this is the first time we're really feeling like the real you is coming out.
Right.
And so these are skills that you can learn, right? And MDMA is a tool for that. But and so you think men necessarily in our culture need more training in this.
Yeah.
Um, where do women come in? Like what do women need to work on to facilitate this process? Because I'm assuming it's not just all men are cavemen and women are, spiritual angels who, like so what do women work on with this medicine and just in your other work that you've seen?
Well, a major part of what I see women need to do is they need to understand that men are very different than them
Mm,
and to understand they have different needs and that men, don't read women's minds. They need to be told exactly what the women want. So women have to be very precise in stating what they want. And yet a lot of women have this thing, well, he should just know. Well, they don't know.
mhm.
So I often have women say specifically what they want and to be able to, instead of say nag or complain, tell men what really makes them happy. So I use little sentence prompts like, it would make me so happy if you would do XYZ or whatever it is.
Mhm.
That's a lot better than you never do blah, 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 And so men want to be a hero, but they're not that attuned to predicting what women want unless the women say it very, very uh, lovingly and specifically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then do you feel, I'm sure you've heard of Brene Brown and she works with vulnerability a lot. And in a lot of her work, she says, the women also reinforce the men not being feeling and empathetic. They might say they want it in some ways, but then when it starts to come out, there is some sort of negative reinforcement on that for the men. And I'm sure that's not happening in the sessions, but do you hear that amongst men who are saying like, well, I tried and then I got kind of whacked in the, and I'm retracted again. Is that a common story?
Yeah, so women have to be really attuned to when men are taking a step towards vulnerability. The word, if you want intimacy, the instructions are in the word, into me see. So when men are reaching out in that way, the women have to positively reinforce it because, as boys, we were shut down. We were told, be a man and why are you crying and all that stuff. So I do help women to see how they can reinforce their man to be more empathic, understanding, and vulnerable.
Mhm. And outside of this, I mean, I know you have a deep meditation practice. I think in our pre-interview, you said something like 15,000 hours of meditation. That's a certainly a high level of dedication. What other things, practices, I think for me, a turning point in my life was just a choice where I decided to say that I'm going to take care of what's going on with me and I'm going to go inward. And psychedelics is part of it, but not something I do on a daily basis, meditation, breath work. So if there's a man out there who's saying, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do a session, but I want to create sort of a sustainable practice and I'm not doing anything now, where would you have them start to reinforce what they might learn in a session, or just skip the psychedelics altogether because they don't want to do that?
Yeah. Well, I have a podcast called Awareness Explorers where I've interviewed everybody from Deepak Chopra to the Dalai Lama.
Hmm.
And at the end of each, we have like 200 episodes. At the end of each episode, I ask, somebody like Deepak Chopra, give me your best 10-minute guided meditation, the one that knocks people's socks off. And he's been developing that for 40 years. So on my website, awarenessexplorers.com, in the navigation bar, it's the word meditations, and we have 200 of those all for free. So I think people meditating for 10 minutes with a meditation that really helps them feel into their heart, really helps them feel peaceful, is a good 10 minutes to do every day because, life is very stressful. So that's a free resource that I think can be very helpful. But I think also that, everybody has to find their own thing that works for them. For some people that's weightlifting, for some people it's meditation, for some people it's psychedelics. Find the thing that really turns you on and just make sure you do it every day.
And so we're in this possibility. I think the likelihood of MDMA becoming legal has become less recently, right? I mean, it seems like Lycos and that whole thing, they didn't do their trial well, and then even in the executive order, it wasn't mentioned. So, where do you think we are in that? And then secondly, I think that we talked about, and you said the treatment for MDMA when it's legal is going to cost 15 grand or something with all the
Mhm.
things around it. Obviously, there is some sort of, it's his Schedule 1 drug at this point, but you've been doing it a long time, and I think the setup that you have is pretty reasonable for people to do it. Where do you think we are with like the best way to get this into the hands of people so that they can make this work? Do you think the legal route is going to do that?
Well, I think what's happening, it's already happening in the recent presidential order. They were fast tracking a drug called methadone, which is extremely similar to MDMA. It's just one atom different,
Hmm.
and that way, big pharma can patent it. And when big pharma is money behind it, then it becomes legal like in a year
Hmm.
versus 70 years.
Hmm.
It's a real different process
Right.
when they can give $100 million to a politician and say, make this legal. Then they do. And that's what happened with the executive order is that there was big pharma putting in a bunch of money saying, we're going to do the trials. We already know how it's going to turn out. The trials with MDMA were fantastic, but big pharma couldn't patent MDMA. So they were trying to create obstacles to it. But I do believe that there'll be various, and I talked to Rick Doblin of MAPS about this recently. There'll be various patentable MDMA analogs, they're called, and they will pass FDA inspection because they're just so effective. And veterans groups and other groups are really pushing for this and finding that it's just a lot more effective for treating trauma and other things than the standard things like antidepressants, which don't work very well.
Why is MDMA not patentable? I mean, Lycos is a pharma company, and they were moving it through the FDA. I mean, why is it
Well,
different?
mostly because it was invented in 1913, so its patent would run out. So you can't patent a drug after a bunch of years. It's in the public domain.
Mm.
So you have to make a slightly different atom or molecule, and then
Hmm.
you can patent it.
And methylenome, I mean, you would say that it's essentially going to give the same results as MDMA.
Well, we'll see. Those studies are being done now.
Hmm.
Now, and there's other ones besides methadone. There's a lot of ones that are very similar, like 3-MMC, 4-MMC. There's a lot of different ones,
Hmm.
and we'll see which ones do best in the trials. I've tried them all,
Hmm.
and the main difference between them is the length of time that you're on it. So with
Mm.
MDMA, that's like 5 to 6 hours. With methadone, that's like 2 to 3 hours. With 3-MMC, that's 3 to 4 hours. So they each have their place, and they're all very similar.
Interesting. So just the length of time, and you could obviously lengthen the time, but just by taking more, right? If you wanted
Yeah.
a longer session. So you're saying in your experience, and you obviously have a lot of experience using this, that the actual feeling of it and the closeness and the lowering of the barriers and all that with all these analogs is going to be pretty similar.
Yeah, that's been my experience. Um, some people will find one better than the other, meaning less side effects or whatever it is. Now that we have more money going into it, rather than just, roadblocks, I think we're going to find out really what works best for most people.
Yeah. And so we talked about, you had this thing where in our interview about two channels, channel one and channel two, that people operate on mostly. And channel two is the noisy, reactive mind. And channel one, I guess, is more of a spiritual, calm place. Um,
Hmm.
how do people cultivate more of channel one? And is channel two of value at some times and you want to have access to it, correct? Like, or is it always a negative? Mm.
Well, you need channel two to operate in this world.
Hmm.
There's a lot going on, and you better be able to handle those things. There's a lot of stressors, but channel one, call it the peace inside, the quiet inside, is also extremely important. It's like two wings of an airplane. If you have one wing that's strong and one wing that's weak, the plane will go around in circles and then crash.
Hmm.
So I know people who can get quiet inside, but they can't handle the world.
Hmm.
That's not good. And then I know people who are really good at handling the world, making money, things like that, but they have no peace. Well, those people crash as well.
Hmm.
So one of the things I do when I work with people on MDMA, either individuals or couples, is I try to find the thing that will get them to a place of quiet and peace as quickly as possible.
Hmm.
So I collect methods. I have like 160 methods that I've learned, and I try to find what is the quickest way that they can tune into peace. So I could give a couple examples of those methods if you want,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of them. And on MDMA, I can tell what works really quickly.
Yeah.
And once you find a method that helps you to feel peace quickly, well, then you have a friend for life.
Mm. So give us a method that helps someone feel peace quickly. That would be great.
Well, one might be, and this works with a lot of people with trauma, I call it the and also method.
Mm.
Uh, so you start with what you're feeling, like I'm feeling anxious. And then you say, and also I notice my butt feels warm on this chair. And
Yeah.
also I notice that it's a nice day outside. And also I notice that the room's quiet. And also I notice that there's a lot of green in this room. And also I notice, and you keep doing that, making yourself more present.
Mm.
That's a good technique. Uh, the meditations that I talked about earlier are good, but there's a lot of very simple ways. Like, for example, you can focus on a person or animal that you have great affection for and just feel your connection to them. And, I have, besides loving my wife a lot, I have two dogs I love a lot. And I'll just, picture my dogs and send them love and remember fun times playing with them. And that can quiet me down really quickly. So the key is to find what works for you.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I can see that and also really working for me specifically when because with trauma, at least the way that I oriented around it, it got me so narrowly focused within me. There was really difficult sensations in one place, and part of my
Yeah.
somatic work is just to feel different parts of your body, and you realize, oh, actually, I'm only kind of feeling troubled in about couple percent of my whole body. The rest of me feels fine, and then bringing
Right.
it out into the other room. I think that's a really valuable technique. And then, you hear about these guru types. You mentioned Deepak Chopra. He's been in the news recently, where people have real spiritual attainment, right? And I think that's real. And they also perpetrate some pretty terrible things. So there's a balance, right, between, yes, I'm going to go inward and stillness, and being able to be still and calm and present doesn't necessarily take away your personal psychological issues, correct?
Yeah, it's kind of like a compartment, and I think it's important that people not just good at being quiet, but how to be good in relationships, how to be good at communicating, how to be good at making money in this world.
Hmm.
All of those things are important, and unfortunately, most people get good at one of those categories, and to the detriment of the others.
Yeah, and I think there is sort of this aura around, I feel like meditation and enlightenment, and the way it's been pitched has been sort of, if you focus on this and you get to a spot, then you are this enlightened being, and an enlightened being isn't going to abuse people or do anything. But it really seems like you need to understand the system in which you're operating, right? and
Yeah.
and some level of peace and stillness is certainly part of that. Learning your personal stuff, weighing in on relationships, it all seems to make a lot of sense. Do you use the medicine in your 24-year marriage now? Do you periodically drop in?
I do. I like to do it like every 2 years just to clear any cobwebs. And, about 10 years ago, an interesting story
Hmm.
um, is that my wife and I were having trouble because she was very upset at me all the time.
Hmm.
And so this went on for like 3 or 4 months. So we took some MDMA together, and what came out was that her aunt had died 3 months earlier, and she was very close to this aunt, and she was very upset at herself for not visiting her aunt in her dying day, and she was taking that out on me. And when she realized this, she cried for like 20 minutes while I held her, and all her anger at me disappeared. So I didn't know what was going on. She didn't know what was going on, but the MDMA actually kind of had an intelligence to root out what was the problem between us.
Interesting. Yeah, you say that, and there's some, oftentimes you're told to go into these things with intentions, but my intention is often curiosity, because I don't
Yeah,
necessarily know what I do. If I knew everything, then I would just fix it. But to have a little bit of a curious intention, and maybe it's the MDMA has the wisdom, or maybe it's just unlocking our ability to tap into our inner wisdom that's there.
yeah, yeah. So, I'm very happy to report my parents' marriage was healed through MDMA.
Wow, let's
Uh,
hear
I, I,
about
re-
that.
I recount this in the Ecstasy for Couples book. They were curious why I was dealing with this illegal drug. And I said, well, the only way to know what it does is if you try it. And I was surprised to hear that they said, okay, we'll try it.
Hmm.
So I told them how to take it in a nice set and setting. And a year later, I asked them if they tried it, and they said, yeah, we tried it, but nothing happened.
Hmm.
And I thought that was very unusual. So I said, well, give me more details. And they said, well, we waited 20 minutes and we didn't feel anything. It ends up it takes 45 minutes for the drug to take effect. So I said, what happened after the 20 minutes? And they said, well, we had nothing planned that night. So we ended up sitting on the couch, and we ended up having the best night of our entire marriage. We'd been arguing about this one issue over money for the last like 2 years, and it was horrible. And we worked all that out that night, and we talked about how much we loved each other and how grateful we were. And the only problem was that the drug never took effect. So I'm laughing this whole time because that's, of course, the effect of the drug.
Mm.
And they didn't even realize that they just realized that they felt connected and they were able to work through problems. And that's one of the things I like about MDMA. It's not like LSD or psilocybin or ayahuasca, where you're really, you know, uh, in a different reality in a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a heart opener and a connecting thing. And then you work with it also with individuals. How do you do it in the context of an individual therapy session?
Well, in my book, Ecstasy is Medicine, I go into that a lot. And I'd say half my clients are working with individuals with trauma or spiritual evolution, more inner peace, and half are couples. Um, and, in a initial phone call with them, we talk about their issues. We talk about what success looks like. So when we do the journey, I know what they're aiming for.
Mhm.
And for a lot of people, there's something in their life that's not right, that's stuck or feels out of kilter, or they're having, trauma symptoms, or they're anxious, or they're depressed. And I find that, it's kind of equal to 2 years of good therapy in that one afternoon
Mm.
with the help of this medicine. And it looks different for different people, but things that might take a year on normal therapy, such as full comfort and honesty and non-defensiveness and going to the root of a problem, that usually takes about an hour on MDMA. And
Mm.
then we can really get to kind of like rewiring the brain in some ways, and finding those simple methods that are really going to help them with their trauma or their anxiety or whatever it is.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so to give people some guidance, suppose they don't live near you and they don't want to do it on Zoom. How does one find somebody that's safe? What kind of questions should somebody ask? What should someone know about, if they're not in this world and they don't have a guy on Signal and all the things, right? They're
Yeah.
like, how do they find this medicine and do it safely with somebody who can help them?
Well, I have a website which is XTC, the letters XTC,
Mhm.
as medicine.com, and people can email me there. And I've trained about 500 clinicians around the world. And if people email me, I will send them a list of 10 people that I trust that have been through my training, that I supervise. So I
Mhm.
know that they're good. I know that they charge 1/10 of what MAPS was going to charge. So, they're reasonable. Um, and, they can see some of those people who live, some in Europe, some in the United States. Um, and also, I do tell people that it does seem to work a little bit better over Zoom
Mm.
than in person.
Okay.
I have a lot of data showing that now,
Yeah.
and it is a lot more convenient. So, sometimes people they say they want to do it in person, but then they realize, well, maybe I'll give it a try, and the real results have always been good. So, but I offer those things for free, and also at that website, if they put in their email address, they get uh, two things that are really valuable, I think. One is a document called 10 Ways to Avoid Bad Psychedelic Trips.
Mm.
That's important to know. And then I have something called the 12 Questions that Lead to Instant Intimacy with Anyone.
Mm.
And that's a nice thing to be able to do with your partner or a friend. And that's a really sweet experience. So, but all that's free, and I'm glad to help people if they want to do an in person session with someone else.
Yeah, that sounds like really valuable advice. If somebody was doing an in-person session, what is something that would be crossing the line that someone would say that's not right? I mean, touching, I don't know, like that kind of thing. I know some of the thing with Maps was they had in Maps Canada, they had an inappropriate session that was on film, and a woman actually, sued and all of that. So, like,
Yeah.
what would be so people would know going in to say, okay, this is where the line would be drawn, because I know a lot of people would want to do this in person.
Yeah. Well, I have that discussion with people before the session,
Hmm.
and I tell them my boundary, which is I will never touch you anywhere other than holding your hand if you request it.
Okay.
They may have a boundary like I don't want you to touch me under any circumstances, and I always respect that boundary. But I have found with some people that holding their hand is mutually therapeutic,
Hmm.
meaning it helps them. And I've actually also had people bring a partner in who will cuddle with them that's not on the MDMA
Mm.
if they feel a desire to do that. And I leave the room at that point and they can cuddle because sometimes being held is good. But I also do that over Zoom where
Mm.
sometimes people will bring their partner in during the session who's not on MDMA, and that partner will hold that person as part of their releasing of some trauma.
Nice. And then what type of people are, maybe medical conditions or, psychological things are contraindicated and shouldn't be doing this?
Yeah. Well, of course, I go a lot into that in the books, but the number one by far is people on SSRIs or antidepressants should
Okay.
not be taking MDMA. And that's unfortunate, but the problem isn't that so much dangerous. It's that the antidepressants and the MDMA cancel each other out, so they don't feel it,
Mm.
and therefore it's not really effective. But if somebody's had a recent heart attack or stroke, what I do is I have them get a full physical from a doctor that I recommend. And sometimes people are on obscure medications that I check out to make sure that there's no contraindication.
Interesting. And with the SSRIs, given how prevalent they are, there must be some
Mhm.
people who would like to get off of them and look at MDMA as a potential for that. Tapering off of that is like, how does one, if one says, well, I've been on this for years and it's not really doing it for me, I want to try something new. How does one endeavor to taper off an SSRI to be able to, try to get the benefits of other treatments?
Yeah, good question. Well, first of all, Wellbutrin is in a class by itself because that works through a different neural pathway. So that's not so much a problem. For that, they only have to be off it for like 3 to 5 days.
Okay.
But with the other SSRIs, they really have to be off them for about at least 2 months. And I suggest that they contact the doctor that put them on SSRIs to come up with a tapering plan that is supervised by their doctor.
Wow, so that's a significant period of time. So somebody like that it might be 4 months before, I mean, while they're tapering and then they're finally off of it and all of that. And typically, is your experience with people doing that that's an okay process for them? And do they, once they do, they go through that process and they're okay to do it, are they any more likely to get benefit out of it than someone off the street? Just as, is there any benefit or a negative to having been in on SSRIs?
Well, usually those people are wanting to get off the SSRIs because they're not that effective for them.
Mm.
Antidepressants really are not very effective. They're only, according to most studies, 1% better than placebos,
Mm.
but that's for most people. For a few people, they're really great. So the people I see generally want to get off them, and I'd say 90% do so successfully. About 10% probably say, "Hey, I didn't realize it, but it was actually helpful for me," and they go back on them.
Mhm.
And I respect whatever works for people. So, but a lot of them get off it, and then with the MDMA session and my help, they're able to handle their depression very directly versus what antidepressants often do, which is kind of just reduce some symptoms.
Interesting. And you said I forgot to sort of circle back on it when we were talking about in person and Zoom, and you said actually the data is that it's better on Zoom. So what kind of data are you talking about there?
Well, for 40 years and the 700 people I've worked with, I've asked them a month after our integration session
Hmm.
on a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being a life changing experience, positive life changing experience, and 1 being no effect, how would you rate this? A simple subjective thing.
Hmm.
So the 400 sessions that I did before Zoom, which was 2020, people rated it as 8.1 on that
Okay.
1 to 10 scale. The 300 sessions I've done on Zoom, people rated it as 8.6.
Okay.
Of course, individuals vary. Definitely for any woman who has had a sexual harassment, rape thing, the Zoom is much, much more effective because, taking a drug in my office where they don't know me that well, it can trigger that rape trauma. So in those cases, I always make sure that it's done over Zoom.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I'm a man who experienced that, and I had, of course, I'm a little more powerful. I had a woman facilitator, but I have always tended towards, without maybe overtly knowing it, going towards women leading these ceremonies because of the nature of my experiences, and so
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. What about ages? There's a seemingly an epidemic of anxiety and depression in younger people. Um, at what age is this appropriate treatment for?
Well, I certainly don't do it for anybody under 18.
Hmm.
But, it's interesting. I would say I have worked with some people who are like 20, 21, a couple that were 19. But I mostly see people who are in their, 40s, 50s. I worked with a woman who I'm allowed to tell her story. Uh, she was Miss America 1957.
Wow,
So
the
she's
year
now
of your birth.
93.
Oh wow, 93. Amazing.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah. So
and how old was she when she actually did the medicine?
92.
92. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all ages and through Zoom, many countries from China to Australia to Europe to African nations, that has also opened up possibilities.
Wow, amazing. Well, as we wrap up, is there anything that we should have talked about that would be valuable in this conversation? Of course, you'll tell your websites again and we'll put it all in the show notes and get your information out there.
Well, the number one thing is if anybody has ever had a difficult experience on MDMA, my guess is that they did not have pure MDMA. And
Mm,
in America, 40% of the MDMA going around is mixed with other things.
okay.
So, with the clients that I work with, I've come up with a way that I can get them get pure medicine guaranteed,
Okay.
and that's been very helpful because it's a very gentle drug. I'd say the number one problem I've had is about 1 or 2% have a couple of days afterwards that are challenging to them, more
Mm.
physically. That makes them very tired. But I give people, and in my books, Ecstasy as Medicine and Ecstasy for Couples, some supplements that they can take that help with the sometimes challenging after effects, like a tight jaw.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I definitely know that 2 days later, I tend to get kind of mopey, honestly. I feel like I've kind of
Yeah,
used up my happy chemicals for, in that session. And I have some friends that are starting a business doing that. The right supplement stacks, at least for me, mitigated enough where it's still not your best day, but
yeah,
given the benefits that you might get in a session, I think they are mitigated. And given the legal environment, you feel like everybody is as covered as is possible in your setup?
Yeah, I've talked to lawyers about this, and first of all, no person has been arrested for MDMA therapy in America ever. So,
Okay.
we're dealing with zero out of a million. So, uh, and the setup for people getting medicine, I've been doing that for 40 years with no problems. So I feel pretty comfortable, and I actually have done this with a lot of police officers,
Mm.
meaning they come to me for trauma work. If I ever got in trouble, I think I'd bring down the LA Police Department, but hopefully.
That's funny. And then the people that you have trained, they think, I mean, obviously you've been doing this a long time and you're one of the giants in the field, but they can deliver an experience that people are going to get the most out of and all of that. I mean, we have to train probably thousands of people as this gets more popular, maybe even millions to actually do this. It can be trained and people can be successful after those trainings.
Well, I have a 50-hour training, and people can look at that at mdmatraining.net. So 50 hours is a lot, especially if you're an experienced coach or therapist. And I supervise 10 of those people ongoingly.
Hmm.
So I make sure that the nuance is, understood, and I feel very confident with those 10 that I supervise, although 500 people have taken the training, and I hope that they got what they need from the training.
Got it. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you coming on, dealing with all of our technical issues. I think we actually got this done. Thank you so much for being on. We'll put all your information in the show notes. I can say from my personal experience, I've had great healings both for personal sexual abuse trauma as
Mm.
well as connecting on the couple's relationships. And yeah, honestly, given the circumstances that I was dealing with, I feel like I really needed these medicines. I know that people can do it another way, and there's plenty of other opportunities out there. But for me personally, I can say they were very helpful. Thank you for what you're putting out there. I appreciate your time. And yeah, well, we will keep in touch. I'm interested to hear about your next book. I'm sure that what do you have an idea for another book? You write them pretty frequently.
I do. My next book will be somehow around what I call highly anomalous phenomena. You could call it, miracles, spontaneous healing, psychic events. I've
Mm,
had a lot of those in my life, and a lot of people have. So I think just kind of exploring the farther reaches of the human mind and spirit is always fun.
great. Well, we'll have you back on when that one comes out. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time and have a wonderful evening.
You too, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, bye bye. Thank you so much for being here with me. And let's keep going on this journey together. If you know someone who needs this, share it with them. I'm here every Wednesday, and I hope to see you too.